Montana, December 1918. The room smelled of camphor and dying embers. Caleb Stone lay propped against pillows that had long ago lost their softness, his 91 years carved into every line of his weathered face. The pneumonia had settled deep in his chest, each breath a labor, each exhale a small surrender to the inevitable. Beside the bed, Samuel sat motionless. 23 years old, hollow-eyed, his right hand trembling as it gripped the handle of a skinning knife. The Great War had ended 6 weeks ago, but the boy who'd shipped out to France had not returned. In his place sat this stranger wearing Samuel's face, haunted by the screams of dying men, at Belleau Wood, tortured by memories of friends torn apart by German artillery. The knife blade caught the lamplight. Samuel's thumb traced its edge with the careful precision of a man who'd already made his decision. Caleb's weathered hand shot out faster than seemed possible for a dying man. His fingers closed around Samuel's wrist with surprising strength. "You think you're the only man who ever wanted to die?" Samuel's eyes widened. The old man's grip didn't loosen. "Let me tell you about your grandmother, the woman I married, the only woman I ever met who wanted death as badly as you do right now." Caleb's chest rattled with effort, but his eyes burned with sudden intensity. "She tried to kill me 4 times before she realized I was the only man in these mountains who wouldn't hand her over to the people hunting her. And before this story's done, you'll understand why I'm telling it, why you need to hear it. Put that blade down and listen." Samuel's hand slowly opened. The knife clattered to the floor. Caleb closed his eyes and the years fell away. Montana Territory, January 1876. The blizzard hit the Bitterroot Mountains with the kind of fury that made old-timers shake their heads and young fools pray. Caleb Stone, 49 years old and lean as a winter wolf, pulled his buffalo coat tighter as he checked the trap line. 20 years he'd lived alone in these mountains. 20 years since Antietam, since the screaming cavalry charge that left 12 good men dead and only Caleb alive to answer for it. The wind howled through the pines like artillery fire. He shook the memory away. Out here, the only battles were against weather and hunger and the slow erosion of a man's sanity when he spent too many winters talking only to himself. The first trap held nothing. The second, a frozen rabbit he'd collect on the return trip. The third trap was sprung, but empty, and something about the disturbed snow made him pause. Boot prints, recent, leading upslope toward the ravine. Caleb unslung his Sharps rifle and followed. 50 yards on, he found the wagon. Overturned in a snow-filled gully, one wheel still spinning slowly in the wind. 4 bodies lay scattered like discarded dolls. 3 men rough-looking, the kind who made their living with guns and cruelty. Each one shot clean kills center mass. The 4th body wore black robes. A nun. Caleb slid down the embankment. The woman's face was pale as the snow lips blue, but no visible wounds. Frozen probably after the wagon crashed. He started to turn away, then noticed the trail of blood leading uphill. Not her blood, someone else's. The tracks were unmistakable. Someone had crawled from this wreck, wounded, desperate. Caleb followed the crimson trail through deepening snow. Half a mile. A mile. The blood drops grew fainter farther apart. Whoever made these tracks was dying. He found the snow cave just as full darkness fell. The shelter was crude but effective, hollowed into a drift beneath an overhanging rock face. Someone had scraped it out with bare hands, judging by the claw marks in the ice. Caleb crouched at the entrance, rifle ready. Inside, curled against the back wall, was another woman in black robes. But this one was breathing. Barely. Caleb's eyes adjusted to the dimness. The woman was tall, unusually so her frame folded into the small space like a broken bird. Blonde hair matted with blood and ice spilled across shoulders that looked strong despite her obvious weakness. An arrow shaft protruded from her left shoulder, the feathered end snapped off close to the skin. She'd broken it herself, probably to fit into the shelter. Her skin was the color of old parchment. Hypothermia advanced stage. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, each one weaker than the last. Caleb didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions, didn't waste time on words. He pulled the skinning knife from his belt and cut through the frozen fabric of her robes, exposing the arrow wound. The shaft had punched through, cleanly missing the lung by perhaps an inch. Lucky. But the cold had slowed the bleeding to a seep, and infection was already setting in around the entry wound. He struck his flint, heating the blade in the small fire he coaxed to life. When the steel glowed red, he pressed it against the wound. The woman's eyes snapped open, golden brown filled with sudden animal terror and rage. She tried to rise to fight, but her body wouldn't obey. A sound escaped her throat, something between a scream and a growl. Caleb held her down with one hand while he cauterized the exit wound on her back. The smell of burning flesh filled the small cave. She thrashed once more, then went limp unconscious. Good. He wrapped her in his buffalo coat, then his own wool blanket, lifted her surprised by the solid weight of her despite her obvious starvation. 6'2" at least, maybe more, with the kind of muscle that came from years of hard labor, not the soft hands of a woman who'd spent her life in prayer. The journey back to his cabin took 2 hours through waist-deep snow. Caleb didn't stop once, didn't rest. The woman's breathing against his chest grew fainter with each mile, and some part of him, some piece he'd thought long dead after Antietam refused to let her slip away. His cabin appeared through the swirling white like a benediction. One-room timber walls chinked with moss and mud, a stone fireplace that could heat the space even in the deepest winter. Home such as it was. Caleb kicked the door open and laid her on his bed, the only bed, built the fire up until the room blazed with heat, stripped away the frozen robes and examined her properly in the firelight. Arrow wound cauterized, multiple lacerations on her arms and hands, defensive wounds, bruising around her ribs, frostbite on 3 fingers of her left hand, black and advanced. Her feet were in better shape, wrapped in what looked like strips torn from her own undergarments. But it was the scars that told the real story. Old surgical scars on her forearms, the kind field nurses got from working too close to bone saws and scalpels. Burn marks on her palms, symmetrical, deliberate. Someone had tortured this woman. Recently, Caleb worked through the night, cleaned the wounds with whiskey, packed the arrow injury with moss to draw out infection, splinted the frost-bitten fingers. When her fever spiked to dangerous levels, he stripped her down and packed her in snow, cooling her degree by degree until the delirium passed. She spoke in her fever dreams. Words tumbled out in a refined English accent, the kind that spoke of education and breeding. Don't let them take the children. Mother of God, all the blood. They're burning everything. The children, please save the children. 3 times she tried to rise to fight invisible enemies. 3 times Caleb pressed her back down, his hands gentle but firm. He'd seen this before at Antietam. Soldiers reliving their trauma in fever sleep, fighting battles that would never truly end. By the 4th morning, her fever broke. Caleb was splitting firewood outside when he heard movement in the cabin. He set down the axe and walked back inside, moving slowly, hands visible. The woman was awake, sitting up in his bed, wrapped in his blankets, with his skinning knife gripped in her right hand and murder in her eyes. They stared at each other across 10 feet of packed earth floor. She was even taller than he'd thought. Sitting up, her head nearly brushed the low rafters. Her blonde hair hung in tangled ropes around a face that might have been beautiful once before whatever happened in that wagon. Now it was all sharp angles and harder eyes. Stay back. Her voice was raw from screaming, but the command in it was absolute. Caleb stopped, raised his hand slowly, non-threatening. You're on my land. I don't want trouble. Are you hungry? She tilted her head, studying him like a wolf studies potential prey. Her knuckles were white around the knife handle. Where are my sisters? Dead. Found them with the wagon. 3 men too, all shot. Did you kill them? No. You did, looks like. Something flickered in her eyes, not guilt, recognition. She remembered. The men who attacked us? Don't know, didn't stick around to find out. Covered the bodies with snow, erased the trail to my cabin. If anyone's tracking you, they won't find you here. Not for a while. Why? Caleb moved to the fireplace, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Ladled stew from the pot hanging over the flames into a wooden bowl. Set it on the floor within her reach, then stepped back. Because you were dying. Seemed a waste. He turned his back on her, a calculated risk, and walked to the door. Stopped with his hand on the latch. Eat or don't, your choice. But you're alive now. Be ashamed to die from stubborn pride. He left the cabin, closing the door behind him. Went back to splitting wood, listening for sounds of movement inside. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then he heard it. The scrape of wood on dirt. The bowl being dragged closer. When he returned an hour later, the bowl was empty and the woman was asleep again, the knife still clutched in her hand. For 3 days they existed in wary silence. Caleb moved about his routines. Check traps, haul water from the creek, tend the fire, cook simple meals. The woman watched everything with those predator eyes, tracking his movements, cataloging his habits. She ate the food he left, but never took her hand off the knife. On the fourth day, she finally spoke. You were a soldier. It wasn't a question. Caleb looked up from where he was sharpening his axe. The woman had moved from the bed to the chair by the fire, her movements still stiff from healing wounds, but growing stronger each day. Was Union or Confederate Union? 5th Michigan Cavalry. She nodded slowly as if this explained something. I was a nurse. Antietam, Gettysburg, Chickamauga. Caleb's hands stilled on the whetstone. He looked at her properly for the first time since she'd woken. Really looked. The surgical scars made sense now. The way she'd assessed her own wounds with clinical detachment, the tolerance for pain. Then you've seen worse than whatever happened in that wagon. Yes. The single word carried the weight of 1,000 amputations, 1,000 dying boys calling for mothers who'd never hear their cries. They didn't speak again that day, but something had shifted, a recognition. They were both survivors of battles that could never be won, carrying wounds that would never fully heal. Over the next week, Caleb noticed things. The woman knew firearms. When he cleaned his rifles, she watched with the sharp attention of someone who understood the mechanics. Once, when he left a Henry rifle partially assembled, he returned to find it completely reassembled, each piece in perfect order. She'd done it one-handed, her wounded shoulders still too weak for heavy work. She organized his medical supplies without being asked. Lined up the bottles and tins according to some system only a trained nurse would recognize. Bandages folded precisely. Instruments cleaned and ready. She never asked permission. Never explained herself. Just did what needed doing. And there were the scars on her hands. Caleb finally recognized them for what they were. Burn marks. Not the holy kind. The kind inflicted by men with matches and patience and no mercy at all. On the 14th day, everything changed. Caleb was checking his southern trap line when he heard horses. 5 riders moving slow, searching. He melted into the tree line and watched them pass. Hard men. The kind who made their living tracking people who didn't want to be found. The leader was in his 40s, scarred-faced Confederate cavalry saber strapped to his saddle. He reined in his horse 50 yards from Caleb's hiding spot and examined the wagon wreck that Caleb had left undisturbed. She killed 3 of my men. Woman's not natural. Track her. Caleb waited until they moved on, then spent an hour racing any trail that might lead to his cabin, covered tracks with pine branches, scattered deer scent to confuse tracking dogs, led a false trail south away from his homestead. When he returned to the cabin, the woman was waiting. She'd barricaded the door with a table, armed herself with his spare rifle, positioned herself at the window with a clear field of fire on the approach trail. Caleb stopped in the clearing, hands visible. 5 men, looking for you. They're gone for now. She lowered the rifle but didn't put it away. They'll come back, I know. Why warn me? Why not just hand me over? Caleb pushed past the barricade and began unloading the supplies from his pack. Because you set this up right. Good defensive position, clear sight lines, rifle ready, but finger off the trigger until you had positive identification. You think like a soldier, not a victim. He met her eyes. I respect that. That night, she told him the truth. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, and she spoke in that refined English accent, each word carefully chosen. My name is Margaret, Sister Margaret Pierce. I came to this country 15 years ago from London, joined the Sisters of Mercy in Boston, served as a nurse during the war. She paused, her fingers absently working the rosary beads that hung from her belt. Caleb noticed for the first time that the beads were stained dark. Old blood never fully cleaned. After the war, I was sent west, to the St. Catherine Mission in northern Montana Territory. We taught the Blackfeet children reading, writing, mathematics, the things that would help them survive in a world that wanted them dead or invisible. Her voice hardened. Last November, a man came to the mission, Federal Marshal Warren Cross, said we were harboring hostile Indians, said we had to evacuate immediately. Mother Superior refused. Showed him our papers, our authorization from the territorial government. Everything legal, everything proper. She stopped, stared into the flames. He shot her, right there in the chapel. Then his men killed everyone else. 12 nuns, 4 priests, 28 children. Caleb's hands clenched involuntarily. He said nothing. I hid 6 children in the root cellar, covered the door with flour sacks. When the shooting stopped, when the mission was burning, I got them out, loaded them into a wagon with whatever supplies I could grab. $3,000 in gold coins meant for food and medicine. We ran. She looked up and Caleb saw the killer in her eyes, the same look he'd seen in his own reflection after Antietam. They tracked us for 3 months, sent bounty hunters. Those 3 men you found dead, they caught us 2 days ago, tried to take the children, tried to take me alive. Her fingers touched the rosary beads. I killed them. One with a rifle, one I beat to death with a rock. The third tried to run. I strangled him with these beads while he begged for mercy. But there was a 4th man. He shot arrows to avoid noise. One hit me, another killed Sister Ann. She was the other nun in the wagon. The one you found, the children scattered when the wagon crashed. I don't know if they survived. Caleb fed another log to the fire. Outside, the wind picked up howling around the cabin's corners like lost souls. And the men today, same hunt, different hunters. Marshall Cross won't stop until I'm dead. I'm the only witness, the only one who can prove what he did. She reached into her robes and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, spread them on the floor between them. Survey documents. The mission land sits on top of a copper deposit, worth millions. Cross owns part of the mining company that wants the land. The massacre wasn't about hostile Indians. It was about money. Caleb studied the papers, official seals, technical drawings, assay reports listing copper concentrations that would make any mining company salivate. You could take these to the territorial government. Cross owns the territorial government, or enough of it. That's why they issued a wanted poster for me, murder of a federal marshal they claim. Made me the criminal instead of the witness. She gathered the papers back up, tucking them away. I'm sorry, I brought danger to your home. I'll leave in the morning. Caleb looked at this woman, this killer nun, this survivor who'd fought off 3 armed men to protect children who weren't even her own blood. You'll freeze in a day. Wounds not healed enough for hard travel. I can't ask you to risk your life for me. You're not asking. I'm deciding. He stood, walked to the rifle rack mounted on the wall, began cleaning his weapons with methodical precision. Those men today, you recognize their leader, no? Why Confederate cavalry saber. Specific maker's mark. Only saw one other like it. Battle of Antietam. Man carrying it tried to kill me. Would have succeeded if a Union nurse hadn't shot him first. He glanced at Margaret. Strange coincidence. Me finding another nurse all these years later. Both times someone needed saving. Margaret studied him with new understanding. That's why you're helping me. Partially. What's the other part? Caleb checked the action on the Sharp's rifle, testing the trigger pull. Antietam. I was a cavalry scout, led my unit into a Confederate ambush. 12 men dead, only survivor was me. Court-martialed for negligence. Acquitted but dishonorably discharged. Came out here to forget. He set the rifle down. Can't forget, but maybe I can stop running from it. They sat in silence for a long time. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and somewhere in the darkness, 5 men were planning their next move. Margaret broke the silence. What happened at Antietam? It wasn't your fault. You weren't there. Neither were you when Cross massacred those children. But you're carrying it anyway. The words hit like physical blows. Caleb turned away, jaw tight. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start preparing. For what? For when they come back. Because they will. And when they do, we're going to be ready. Margaret stood. For the first time, Caleb saw the full height of her. 6'3" easily, maybe more. Strong shoulders despite the healing wound. Hands that had wielded scalpels and rifles with equal skill. She extended her right hand. Sister Margaret Pierce. Though I think the sister part may no longer apply. Caleb took it. Her grip was firm, callous, the handshake of someone who'd earned their strength through labor, not privilege. Caleb Stone. And I don't much care what you call yourself. You're alive. That's enough. The next 7 days passed in careful preparation. Caleb showed Margaret his defense plans. The cabin sat on high ground with clear sight lines in 3 directions. The fourth side backed against a cliff face unscalable. Good defensive position, but it could become a trap if they were surrounded. Together they set traps on the approach trails. Bear traps, vicious steel jaws capable of breaking a horse's leg disguised under thin layers of snow. Tripwires connected to cowbells that would provide early warning. Caltrops, nasty four-pointed spikes that would cripple any man or mount unlucky enough to step on them, scattered across the likely attack routes. Margaret worked with surprising strength despite her healing wound. She cut firing ports in the cabin wall's 6 total position to provide overlapping fields of fire. Helped Caleb pack earth and snow against the exterior walls, creating improvised bulletproofing. Reinforced the door with iron plates scavenged from an old stove. At night, they planned. "You'll take the loft," Caleb said, pointing to the small sleeping platform he'd built under the rafters. "Better angle on the northern approach. That's where they'll come from following the main trail." "What will you use?" "Henry rifle. 16 rounds lever action." "You know it." Margaret smiled grimly. "I've fired hundreds. Antietam Field Hospital. We kept them loaded in case Confederate cavalry broke through the lines." "Good. I'll take the sharps. 50 caliber single shot, but accurate to 800 yards. I can drop their horses before they get close. Force them to dismount. Even the odds." She studied the hand-drawn map he'd sketched of the surrounding terrain. "What about ammunition?" 42 rounds for the sharps. 160 for the Henry. Enough to fight off a company if we're smart about it. And if they burn us out?" Caleb pointed to a spot on the map. "Root cellar, access through trapdoor under the bed. Tunnel runs 100 yards to that stand of pines. We can use it to escape if necessary, or to flank them if they think they have us trapped." Margaret traced the tunnel route with her finger. "You've thought about this before. Out here, a man who doesn't think about how he might die usually doesn't last long." On the 21st day since Caleb found her in the snow, Margaret noticed him kneel by his bed before sleeping. His hands were clasped, his head bowed, but his lips didn't move. Silent prayer, or perhaps just silent remembrance. She said nothing. But the next morning, when Caleb found his knives sharpened to razor edges, he understood. Some conversations needed no words. On the 26th day, they heard the signal. It came at dusk, a wolf howl long and mournful echoing across the valley. Then another answering from a different direction. Then a third. Caleb's hands stilled on the rabbit he was skinning. "That's not wolves." Margaret appeared in the doorway, rifle already in hand. "How many?" "At least 3, probably more. They're coordinating, surrounding us." Caleb stood, wiped the blood from his hands. "Tomorrow, they'll come at dawn. That's when we'll be coldest, slowest. Standard cavalry tactic." He met her eyes. "Last chance to run. I can create a distraction. Give you a head start." Margaret's expression didn't change. "I've run enough. If I'm going to die, I'd rather do it standing next to someone who knows how to fight." Caleb allowed himself a small smile. "Your funeral. Better than dying alone." They spent the night in preparation, positioned ammunition at each firing port, filled buckets with water in case of fire, checked and rechecked every weapon. When everything was ready, when there was nothing left to do but wait, they sat by the fire. Margaret spoke first. "Caleb, if I don't survive tomorrow, you will. But if I don't, the children, the 6 I saved, if they're still alive, they'll be in the camps. Fort Benton, probably. Someone needs to check on them, make sure they're safe." Caleb nodded. "I'll check, thank you." Silence for a moment. Then Caleb spoke, surprising himself. "Margaret, what you did, saving those children, killing those men to protect them, that's not murder. That's survival. Don't let anyone tell you different." She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd found her, something soft appeared in those hard eyes. "At Antietam, the men you lost, did you love them? Like brothers. Then their deaths weren't wasted. You're here. You saved me. And through me, maybe those children survive. That's legacy. That's what matters." The words settled into him like warm stones. 20 years of guilt, 20 years of running, and this stranger with blood on her hands had just given him something he'd thought forever lost. Forgiveness. He didn't respond. Couldn't. Just added another log to the fire and watched the flames dance. As midnight approached, Margaret stood. "I should sleep. Tomorrow will be hard." Caleb nodded but didn't move. He'd stand to watch tonight. Let her rest. One of them needed to be sharp when dawn came. Margaret paused at the ladder to the loft. Caleb, yes, thank you, for not asking why I killed those men, for not judging what I had to do. I've done worse for worse reasons. Not my place to judge. She climbed into the loft. Minutes passed. Then her voice drifted down soft in the darkness. I felt nothing when I killed them. No guilt, no horror, just relief that it was over. Does that make me evil? Caleb stared into the fire for a long time before answering. Makes you human. Evil men feel pleasure in killing. Good men feel guilt. But survivors, we feel what we have to feel to make it through. Tomorrow when those men come, you'll kill again if you have to, and you'll feel nothing again. And that's fine. That's survival. One last question drifted down. Will you think less of me? After you see what I can do, Caleb's response was immediate. I'll think you're the bravest person I've ever met. The confession hung in the air between them, unexpected and raw. Neither acknowledged it, but something fundamental had shifted in the small cabin, something that went beyond simple alliance or mutual survival. Margaret's breathing eventually slowed into sleep. Caleb maintained his vigil by the fire rifle across his knees, watching the darkness beyond the window. At 4 in the morning, the cowbells began to ring. Caleb was on his feet, instantly moving to the firing port, peered into the pre-dawn gloom. Shapes barely visible moving through the trees. 6. No 7. Mounted. Approaching from multiple directions. Margaret. They're here. She dropped from the loft, already dressed, already armed. Took her position at the northern firing port without a word. Rules of engagement, Caleb said quietly. I shoot first. Drop as many horses as I can. When they dismount, you pick off stragglers. Aim for center mass. Don't waste ammunition on fancy shots. Understood. If they breach the cabin, we fall back to the root cellar. Understood. Understood. Caleb raised the sharps, settling the stock against his shoulder. Found his first target, lead rider maybe 300 yards out. Man on a gray horse, Confederate saber strapped to his saddle. The man from the wagon wreck. The leader. Caleb's finger found the trigger. Drew a breath. Let half out, squeezed. The sharps roared. The rider tumbled backward off his horse, the animal rearing in panic. And the siege began. The sharps' rifles' echo rolled across the valley like thunder. The Confederate officer's body hit the snow and didn't move. His gray horse bolted reins, trailing, disappearing into the tree line. For 3 heartbeats, everything froze. Then chaos erupted. The remaining riders scattered, spurring their mounts toward cover. Caleb worked the sharp's breech, ejecting the spent cartridge, sliding in a fresh round. Found his second target, a rider breaking left, trying to flank around the eastern approach. Breathe, aim, squeeze. The shot took the horse in the chest. The animal went down hard, pinning its rider beneath 1,200 pounds of thrashing muscle. The man's scream cut through the dawn. Margaret's Henry rifle cracked twice in rapid succession. Caleb didn't look to see the results. Trusted her aim, focused on his next target. But the riders had reached cover now, dismounted, taking positions behind trees and rocks. Smart, trained. This wasn't going to be easy. Return fire came in a stuttering volley. Bullets punched through the cabin's shutters, thudded into the reinforced door, whined off the iron stove plates. One round came through Caleb's firing port, missing his head by inches, embedding itself in the back wall. He didn't flinch, found a muzzle flash, aimed 6 inches to the right of it, fired. A man's cry. Hit, but not dead. Wounded men were dangerous, desperate. How many down? Margaret's voice was steady, clinical, the nurse assessing casualties. 2 dead, 1 pinned, 1 wounded, 3 still mobile and shooting. The firing intensified, suppressive volleys designed to keep them from the windows. Professional tactics. These weren't bounty hunters. These were soldiers. Caleb reloaded, counted rounds, 38 left for the sharps. Margaret had burned through 6 Henry rounds, 154 remaining. They can't sustain this rate of fire, he called up to the loft. They'll burn through ammunition in 20 minutes. Then they'll have to either charge or withdraw, or burn us out. The words had barely left her mouth when Caleb smelled it. Smoke. He moved to the southern firing port, saw flames licking at the hay pile he'd stacked against the cabin's back wall. One of them had circled around during the initial exchange, set fire to the dry grass. The flames spread fast, climbing the cabin's rear wall. Black smoke began seeping through the chinks in the logs. Margaret saw it too. She didn't panic, grabbed one of the water buckets, started toward the back wall. No, Caleb's commands stopped her. That's what they want. You expose yourself to put out the fire, they'll cut you down. Then what? We let it burn. For now, focus on the men, not the fire. But the cabin is just wood. We're not. Now shoot. Margaret returned to her position. Her rifle spoke again. Once. Twice. Caleb heard a man curse the sound of someone falling. 3 down, 3 mobile. But the smoke was thickening. The heat building. Caleb's eyes watered. His lungs burned with each breath. They had minutes before the cabin became uninhabitable. He made the call. Root cellar. Now. Margaret dropped from the loft as Caleb threw back the bed, revealed the trapdoor underneath. He yanked it open. Darkness yawned below. The tunnel entrance narrow and low, disappearing into earth. You first, I'll cover. Margaret didn't argue. Dropped into the hole, Henry rifle clutched tight. Disappeared into the tunnel. Caleb grabbed 2 ammunition pouches, his spare Colt revolver, the pouch containing Margaret's survey documents. Fired 3 more rounds through different ports to make the attackers think they were still defending. Then he dropped through the trap door and pulled it shut above him. Darkness swallowed him whole. The tunnel was barely 4 feet high, forcing him to crawl on hands and knees. The walls were packed earth, shored up with timber supports he'd installed years ago against exactly this scenario. The air was close, damp, tasting of minerals and rot. Ahead, he heard Margaret moving, her breathing steady despite the exertion. Good, she wasn't panicking. They crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably 3 minutes. The tunnel sloped upwards, slightly following the natural contour of the land. Behind them, muffled by earth, came the sound of the cabin's roof collapsing. Sparks and ash would be fountaining into the dawn sky. The attackers would think them dead, burned alive. That gave them maybe 5 minutes before someone thought to check for an escape route. Light ahead. The tunnel's exit concealed among the roots of a massive pine. Margaret emerged first, scanning the area with her rifle. Caleb followed, blinking in the sudden brightness. They were 100 yards from the cabin, screened by dense forest. The tree line provided good cover. From here, they could see the burning structure. 3 men stood watching it, burn rifles lowered, thinking themselves victorious. Caleb counted. Only 3 visible. Where was the 4th mobile attacker? His question was answered by the distinctive click of a hammer being cocked behind them. Don't move. They froze. Dropped the rifles. Slow. Caleb let the sharps fall. Margaret lowered the Henry with visible reluctance. Now turn around, nice and easy. They turned. The man was young, maybe 25, wearing a deputy's badge pinned to a thick wool coat. His revolver was steady, aimed at Caleb's chest, but his eyes kept flicking to Margaret, fear and fascination warring in his expression. You're her, the killer nun. Margaret said nothing. Her face was stone. They said you strangled a man with prayer beads, said you weren't natural. Looking at you now, I believe it. His gun hand trembled slightly, not from fear, from cold. He'd been lying in wait here probably since before dawn. Fingers would be numb. Caleb calculated distances, 15 feet, too far to rush before the deputy could fire. But if he could distract him, get him talking, Margaret might have a chance to move. What's your name, son? Deputy Carson, Helena Territorial Office. You know what your marshal did? At St. Catherine Mission, Carson's jaw tightened. Marshal Cross said they were harboring hostiles, said it was a justified action. He murdered 28 children. Carson swallowed hard. That's a lie. Margaret spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, deadly. I watched him do it. I held a 6-year-old girl while she bled out from a bullet wound. She asked me why the men were hurting her. I had no answer. That's not, I have documents. Proof. The massacre wasn't about hostile Indians. It was about copper deposits, mining rights, money. Carson shook his head, but doubt crept into his eyes. You're wanted for murder. That's all I know. That's all I need to know. Caleb saw it then. The slight relaxation in Carson's gun arm, the way his attention focused on Margaret, forgetting for just a moment about the man to his left. Caleb moved, not toward Carson, toward the ground, dropped flat and rolled right. Carson's shot went high, the bullet cutting air where Caleb's head had been a heartbeat before. Margaret surged forward, impossibly fast for a woman her size, closed the 15 feet before Carson could adjust his aim. Her hand clamped around his wrist, forcing the revolver skyward. Her other hand drove into his solar plexus with surgical precision. Carson folded. Margaret twisted the gun from his grip, reversed. It brought the butt down on the back of his skull. He dropped like a cut string. Caleb was already moving, grabbing their rifles, scanning the tree line. Shouts from the cabin. The other three had heard the shot. "We need to move. Now." Margaret looked down at the unconscious deputy. For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Then she knelt, checked his pulse. Alive. He'll wake in an hour with a headache. You could have killed him. Yes, but you didn't. She met Caleb's eyes. He's young, misled, not evil. There's a difference, no time to discuss it. Caleb grabbed her arm, pulled her into motion. They ran. Behind them, the three remaining attackers reached the tunnel exit, found Carson unconscious, began tracking their escape route. The chase was on. Caleb led them deeper into the mountains. He knew this terrain intimately. Every game trail, every ravine, every place where a man could hide or make a stand. Margaret kept pace despite her healing shoulder wound. Her breathing was labored but controlled. She'd run before, run far. They covered 2 miles in 20 minutes, stopped in a dense thicket of pine concealed by low-hanging branches heavy with snow. How many still following, Margaret asked between breaths. 3. Maybe all of them. Carson might have recovered by now. Ammunition, Caleb checked. 26 rounds for the Sharps. Margaret's Henry still held 148. Enough for a fighting retreat, not enough for a sustained engagement. We can't keep running. Eventually they'll corner us, I know. So what's the plan? Caleb studied the terrain. They were in a narrow valley, steep slopes on either side. A frozen creek ran through the center, ice thick enough to walk on. Perfect kill zone if you were dumb enough to get trapped there, but also perfect for an ambush if you were smart enough to set one. We make them think we're desperate, running blind, lead them into the valley. Then we take the high ground and finish it. Margaret looked at the slopes, at the snow-laden pines that could provide cover, at the killing field below. How do we make them think we're desperate? We give them blood. He pulled his skinning knife. Before Margaret could react, he drew the blade across his left forearm. Not deep, just enough to bleed freely. The crimson drops stood out brilliant against the white snow. Margaret's eyes widened. Then she understood. She took the knife, cut her own arm, added her blood to his, a trail any tracker could follow. They're going to think we're wounded. Weakening, that's the idea. They moved down into the valley, leaving an obvious trail. Blood drops every few yards, stumbling footprints. The signs of prey running scared. At the valley's center, where the creek widened into a small pond, Caleb stopped. Cross here. Walk on the ice. When you reach the far side, climb to that outcropping. You'll have a clear shot down into the valley. Anyone who follows our trail will be exposed for at least 200 yards. What about you? I'll double back. Circle around to the north slope. Catch them in a crossfire. Caleb. We don't have time to argue. They're 10 minutes behind us, maybe less. Go. Margaret held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, turned, began walking across the ice. Caleb watched until she reached the far side, saw her start the climb. Then he backtracked, careful to step in his own footprints. Found a game trail that switched back up the northern slope. Climbed fast, ignoring the burn in his legs, the fire in his lungs. Reached his position just as the first pursuer entered the valley. It was the scarred Confederate officer, the one Caleb thought he'd killed with his opening shot. Apparently, he'd only wounded him. The man's left arm hung useless, blood-soaked, but his right hand held a revolver steady. 2 more men appeared behind him. One was Deputy Carson, conscious but moving gingerly. The other was a grizzled tracker type reading the blood trail with professional attention. They followed the signs directly to the creek. Stopped at the edge of the ice. The officer studied the far side, saw where Margaret had climbed out, smiled. Got them. They're wounded, slow. We finish this now. Carson spoke up, uncertain. Masterson, maybe we should wait. Get reinforcements. That woman, she's dangerous. So Masterson was the Confederate officer's name. Caleb filed it away. Masterson sneered. She's a woman, wounded, running scared. We've got 3 guns to their 2. This ends here. He stepped onto the ice. That was his mistake. Caleb Sharp spoke from the north slope. The heavy round took Masterson in the chest, punching through ribs, exploding out his back in a spray of crimson. He went down hard, skidded across the ice, came to rest in a spreading pool of red. Before the others could react, Margaret's Henry cracked from the south. The tracker took 2 rounds in rapid succession. Center mass, he was dead before he hit the ground. Carson dove for cover behind a boulder. Fired blind in Margaret's direction. His shots went wide. Caleb reloaded. Took careful aim. Carson was pinned. No clear escape route. The kid had maybe 3 seconds before one of them got a clean shot. Carson seemed to realize it. He stood, dropped his revolver, raised his hands. Don't shoot, I surrender. Caleb held his fire, glanced across the valley. Margaret had her rifle trained on Carson but wasn't shooting. The young deputy's voice cracked. Please, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what Cross did. They told us she was a murderer, that she stole from the church. I was just following orders. Caleb descended the slope, keeping his rifle ready. Margaret did the same from her side. They converged on Carson, who stood trembling in the center of the killing ground, surrounded by dead men. Margaret reached him first, looked down at the badge pinned to his coat. How many more are coming? Carson swallowed hard. No more. This was it. Masterson hired us independent, said it was a simple bounty job. Track the nun, bring her in. Didn't say anything about massacres or children or copper mines. You believe him? Caleb asked Margaret. She studied Carson's face with a nurse's clinical assessment. Reading signs of deception, of truth. Yes, he's too scared to lie right now. She lowered her rifle, but her voice was steel. You're going to do something for me, Deputy Carson. You're going to ride to Helena. You're going to find the federal inspector, Thomas Whitman, and you're going to tell him everything you've seen here. The burned cabin, the bodies, Masterson's connection to Marshall Cross, everything. Carson nodded frantically. And if I do, then maybe you survive this with your conscience intact. Maybe you sleep at night without seeing the faces of dead children. She leaned closer. But if you run, if you go back to Cross and warn him, I will find you, and what I did to those men in the wagon will seem merciful compared to what I'll do to you. Do you understand? Carson's face had gone white. He nodded. Take Masterson's horse, ride. Don't stop until you reach Helena. The deputy scrambled for the horse, mounted, looked back once at Margaret and Caleb standing among the dead. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Then he was gone, spurring the horse toward Helena, toward redemption or damnation or whatever waited at the end of his ride. Caleb and Margaret stood in silence. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the blood-stained snow in shades of pink and gold. 3 men dead, 1 wounded and fled. The cabin destroyed. Everything Caleb had built in 20 years of isolation, gone. He waited for the regret, the anger. It didn't come. Instead, he felt something unexpected. Relief. Margaret was searching the bodies, professional, methodical, checking for identification documents, anything useful. She found a leather pouch on Masterson's body. Opened it, her expression hardened. Caleb, look at this. Inside the pouch were papers, official correspondence, letters between Masterson and Marshal Warren Cross, details of the bounty, payments rendered, and something else. A list of names, federal deputies, territorial judges, mining company executives, all marked with notations, paid, controlled, owned. Margaret's fingers trembled as she read. Cross didn't just own a few corrupt officials. He owns half the territorial government. Judges, marshals, land office clerks. The mining company has been systematically buying influence for years. She looked up at Caleb. Even if we reach the federal inspector, even if he believes us, Cross has enough pull to make this disappear. To make us disappear. So what do we do? Margaret folded the papers carefully, tucked them into her inner pocket with the survey documents. We do what I should have done from the beginning. We don't just expose Cross, we destroy him. Completely. Publicly. So thoroughly that he can't buy his way out. How we take this evidence to every newspaper from Helena to San Francisco. We make it too big to bury, too public to ignore. Caleb considered this. It meant more running, more danger, weeks, maybe months of staying ahead of Cross's reach while they built their case in the court of public opinion. But it also meant an end, a real end, not just survival, but justice. He nodded. Then we need supplies. Horses. We can't make a journey like that on foot in winter. I know where we can get them. Where Margaret smiled grimly. St. Catherine Mission. It's abandoned now, but the barns will still have horses. The cellar will have preserved food. And Cross's men won't be watching it. They think everyone's dead. It's 3 days north. In the hardest part of winter, I've made harder journeys. Caleb looked at this woman, this killer nun who'd strangled men with rosary beads, who'd stood in a burning cabin, firing at trained soldiers who'd just orchestrated an ambush with the cold precision of a battlefield commander. When did you become this? Margaret's expression softened for just a moment. Gettysburg. Third day. Pickett's charge failed. Confederate wounded everywhere. We ran out of morphine, out of chloroform, had to amputate with men screaming, had to hold them down while they begged us to let them die. After that, nothing could break me. I'd already seen the worst humanity had to offer. She met his eyes. The massacre at St. Catherine. That wasn't the worst thing I've witnessed. It was just the most recent. So no, I didn't become this. I've always been this. I just hid it better under the habit. Caleb understood. He'd seen the same transformation in himself after Antietam. The moment when you realize the world is crueler than you believe possible, and you either break or you become something harder. They'd both chosen harder. We should move. Caleb gestured toward the northern trail. If Carson doesn't reach Helena, if he doubles back to Cross, we'll have more company soon. They gathered what supplies they could from the dead men, ammunition, food, a better coat for Margaret. Then they began walking north, leaving the bodies for the wolves. The first day was brutal. The temperature dropped to 15 below zero. The wind cut through their layers like knives. They walked in silence, conserving energy, stopping only when absolutely necessary. That night, they made a cold camp in a shallow cave. No fire. Too risky. They huddled together under shared blankets, their combined body heat the only thing standing between them and hypothermia. In the darkness, Margaret spoke quietly. At the cabin, when you cut yourself to leave a blood trail, you didn't hesitate. Neither did you. Most people would have refused, found another way. Most people haven't watched 12 good men die because they made a wrong call. Pain is just information, tells you you're still alive. Silence for a moment. Then Margaret shifted closer. Not romantic, purely practical, sharing warmth. Tell me about them. The 12 men. Why? Because I've told you about the children I couldn't save. Seems fair. Caleb stared into the darkness. He never spoke about Antietam, not in 20 years. But something about this moment, this woman, this shared understanding of loss loosened his tongue. Anderson, Wilson, McCarthy, O'Brien. Names he'd carved into his memory like tombstones. They were good men, young, believed in the cause, trusted me to keep them alive. It was a reconnaissance mission, supposed to be simple. Scout the Confederate positions south of Sharpsburg. Report back. But I read the terrain wrong, led us into a ravine. They were waiting, ambushed us from 3 sides. His hands clenched in the darkness. I was in front, saw the gun barrels first, tried to warn them. But the first volley cut down half the men before they could even draw weapons. The others tried to fight back, tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. How did you survive? A Union nurse. She was with a field hospital, maybe half a mile away. Heard the shooting, came running with a rifle, started firing at the Confederates from their flank, gave me cover to pull 2 wounded men out. But the other 10, he stopped, swallowed hard. I left them, dying, screaming for help, and I ran. You saved 2, that's more than nothing. I lost 10, that's more than everything. Margaret's hand found his in the darkness. Squeezed, the children I hid in the root cellar. I told you there were 6. That was a lie. There were 8, but 2 were too small. Couldn't keep quiet. When the bounty hunters came close, I had to choose. Risk all 8 being found or... She stopped. Her voice, when it continued, was barely audible. I covered their mouths, held them, waited until they stopped struggling. Then I hid their bodies under flour sacks so the other six wouldn't see. Caleb turned toward her, though he couldn't see her face in the darkness. How old? 3. Both of them. Sisters. God. I killed them to save the others, and I'd do it again. Does that make me evil? It makes you human. It makes you someone who understands that sometimes the only choices are between bad and worse. They held each other through the night. Not lovers, not yet, but something deeper. Two souls who'd been to hell and understood that the only way to survive it was to find someone who'd been there too. The second day was worse. A storm rolled in, reducing visibility to 10 feet. They walked blind, trusting Caleb's sense of direction, his intimate knowledge of these mountains. Twice they nearly walked off cliffs. Once they stumbled into a frozen stream, soaking their boots, risking frostbite. By nightfall, they were hypothermic, shaking uncontrollably. Caleb knew they needed fire or they'd die. He found an overhang, built a small fire shielded from view by the rock face. They stripped off wet clothes, hung them to dry. Huddled naked under blankets skin to skin, the most efficient way to share warmth. Margaret's teeth chattered so hard she couldn't speak. Caleb rubbed her arms, her back, forcing blood flow. She did the same for him. Gradually, the shaking subsided. Warmth returned. They didn't speak, just held each other. Two bodies fighting death. Nothing sexual, everything intimate. When Margaret finally slept, Caleb stayed awake, kept the fire going, watched her face in the firelight, studied the scars on her hands, the strength in her shoulders, the way even in sleep she kept one hand near where her knife lay. He'd spent 20 years alone, convincing himself he preferred it. That isolation was penance, that he didn't deserve connection. But now holding this broken woman who'd killed to protect children, who'd faced down armed men without flinching, who'd chosen to fight rather than run. Now he wondered if maybe isolation had just been cowardice by another name. The third day dawned clear and brutally cold. They made good time, reached the ruins of St. Catherine Mission by mid-afternoon. The massacre site had been covered by snow, but the burned buildings still stood like broken teeth. The chapel roof had collapsed. The school was a charred skeleton. Only the barn remained mostly intact. Margaret stood at the mission entrance for a long time. Her face was unreadable. "Take your time," Caleb said quietly. She shook her head. "No, there's nothing here worth remembering. Only things worth avenging." She walked to the barn. Inside, they found what they'd hoped for. 3 horses half-starved but alive. Someone had left them here, probably thinking to retrieve them later. Hay in the loft, tack in decent condition. The root cellar yielded preserved food, dried beans, salted pork, even a few bottles of sacramental wine. "We can rest here tonight," Caleb said. "Load supplies. Head for Helena at first light." Margaret was standing in what had been the chapel, looking at the blood-stained floor, the bullet holes in the walls. They killed them right here. Mother Superior was standing there. She was saying the rosary when Cross shot her. Caleb joined her, said nothing, just stood beside her. "I prayed for years, believed that faith could overcome anything, that goodness would prevail. Then I watched evil men murder children in God's house and I realized something. What prayer doesn't stop bullets? Faith doesn't stop evil men. Only other men stop evil men, men willing to fight, to kill if necessary." She turned to him. "You asked when I became this. The truth is I became this the moment Mother Superior's blood hit my face and I realized God wasn't going to save us. We had to save ourselves. Is that why you left the order?" "I didn't leave. I was excommunicated, officially, for killing those bounty hunters. The church said I'd violated my vows, that I'd chosen violence over faith. And what do you say I say faith without action is just cowardice with better marketing?" Despite everything, Caleb smiled. "Your Mother Superior would have hated hearing that." Margaret smiled back. Small, but genuine. She would have. Then she would have agreed with me and done penance for it later. She was complicated that way. That night they slept in the barn loft, warmer than the cave, safer than the open ground. But the ghost of the massacre hung heavy in the air. Margaret woke screaming. Caleb held her as she shook, let her ride out the nightmare. When she calmed and she spoke into his chest, "I dream about them every night. The children. Sometimes they're asking me why I didn't save them. Sometimes they're thanking me for trying. I don't know which is worse. I dream about my 12 men. Sometimes they're cursing me for getting them killed. Sometimes they're forgiving me. The forgiveness is worse. Why? Because I don't deserve it. Neither do I. They held each other in the darkness, two haunted souls finding brief refuge from their demons. Caleb spoke without thinking. If we survive this, if we bring Cross down and live through it, what will you do? Margaret was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then I don't know, I'm not a nun anymore. Not really, but I'm not anything else either. I'm just Margaret, and I don't know what Margaret does when the fighting stops. She could stay with me. The words hung in the air, unexpected, raw. Margaret pulled back enough to see his face in the moonlight streaming through the loft window. Stay with you, in the mountains, in a cabin, living like a hermit. Yes, why would I do that? Because you're tired of running. Because you want a place where the world can't find you. Because maybe you're ready to stop fighting and just live. And what would we be to each other? I don't know. Partners, friends, whatever we choose. Margaret studied his face. Her fingers traced the scar on his cheek. I've killed 7 men, Caleb. I'm wanted for murder. I'm excommunicated. I'm broken in ways that can't be fixed. I led 12 men to their deaths. I've been running from that fact for 20 years. I'm broken too. So 2 broken people, living in the wilderness, hiding from our pasts, or 2 survivors, finally finding a place to stop running. She kissed him, soft, tentative, testing. He kissed her back, gentle, respectful, asking permission. They made love in the barn loft, slow, careful, 2 scarred souls offering each other the only comfort they knew how to give. Afterward, they lay tangled together. Margaret's head on Caleb's chest. I'm still going to Helena, still going to destroy Cross, I know. And after that, if we survive, then we'll figure out the rest. Promise me something. What if Cross kills me? If I don't make it, you'll make sure the children are safe. The 6 I saved. You'll check on them. I promise. And you'll tell them. Tell them their teacher didn't abandon them. That she fought. That she died fighting. You're not gonna die. You don't know that? No, but I know you, and you're too stubborn to die before you finish what you started. Margaret laughed softly. Stubborn, is that what you call it? That's the polite word. They slept. For the first time in weeks, neither one dreamed. Morning came too soon. They loaded supplies, saddled horses, prepared for the ride to Helena. 3 days if the weather held, maybe 4. Margaret stood one last time in the ruins of the chapel. Caleb gave her space, watched from a distance as she knelt where Mother Superior had died, prayed, or maybe just said goodbye. When she returned to the horses, her eyes were dry. Her expression was set. Let's finish this. They rode. The journey to Helena was uneventful. No pursuers, no storms, just long miles of frozen landscape and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. They spoke little. But the silence was comfortable now, companionable. On the 3rd night, camped in a grove of pines, Margaret asked the question that had been building. What happens if the federal inspector doesn't believe us? If he's been bought too, then we move to plan B, which is we kill Cross ourselves. She looked at him, saw he wasn't joking. You'd do that, become a murderer, for me. Not for you, for those children, for a Mother Superior, for every person Cross has killed or will kill if he's not stopped. He met her eyes. I've spent 20 years doing penance for 12 deaths I couldn't prevent. Maybe it's time I prevented some deaths instead. Margaret reached across the fire, took his hand. I love you. I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you cut yourself to leave a blood trail. Maybe when you stood with me in a burning cabin. Maybe the first moment you found me in that snow cave and didn't ask questions. But I do. I love you. Caleb squeezed her hand. He'd never been good with words. Never been the romantic type, but he managed 3. I love you too. Helena appeared on the horizon at noon on the 4th day. A frontier town growing into a city. Buildings of wood and stone. Streets of mud and commerce. The territorial capital. The seat of corrupt power. And somewhere in that sprawl, Federal Inspector Thomas Whitman, their last hope for justice without more bloodshed. They rode in slowly, two trail-worn travelers on tired horses. No one looked twice. In a boomtown, everyone was a stranger. Caleb asked directions, found that Whitman kept an office above the land registry. They tied their horses outside, climbed the narrow stairs. The office was small, cramped, papers stacked everywhere. Behind a cluttered desk sat a man in his 50s, graying hair, wire spectacles, the exhausted look of someone fighting a losing battle against bureaucracy. Inspector Whitman. The man looked up, studied them with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Depends on who's asking. Margaret stepped forward, placed the sheaf of documents on his desk. My name is Sister Margaret Pierce. This is Caleb Stone. And we have evidence that Marshal Warren Cross orchestrated the massacre of 40 people at St. Catherine Mission. Evidence that he's been systematically corrupting the territorial government. And evidence that he won't stop unless someone stops him. Whitman stared at the papers, then at Margaret, then at Caleb. Slowly he closed the door to his office, locked it. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything. They talked for 3 hours. Whitman listened, asked questions, examined the documents, the survey maps, the letters between Masterson and Cross, the list of corrupt officials. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, removed his spectacles, rubbed his eyes. This is enough to hang Cross 10 times over. But here's the problem. Cross owns the territorial judge. He owns half the marshals. If I try to arrest him through official channels, he'll know before I get the warrant signed. So what do we do, Margaret asked. Whitman smiled grimly. We don't use official channels. We use the press. I have contacts at 3 newspapers. Helena, San Francisco, Denver. We give them this story, all of it, with documents to prove it. Make it too public to bury. And Cross will run, or fight. Either way, he'll expose himself, make mistakes, and when he does, I'll be waiting with a warrant and a posse he can't buy. How long? 2 weeks to get the story printed, another week for it to spread. By then, Cross will be the most wanted man in 3 territories. Margaret and Caleb exchanged looks. 2 weeks, where do we stay? Whitman considered. There's a boarding house, run by my sister. She's discreet. You'll be safe there while we build the case, and after Cross is arrested or killed. Whitman looked at Margaret with something like respect. After you're a free woman, all charges dropped, self-defense ruling. You'll have your life back. I don't want my life back. I want justice. You'll have both. They left Whitman's office as the sun set, found the boarding house, a clean room, a real bed, the first they'd had since the cabin burned. That night, lying in the darkness, Margaret spoke. 2 weeks, then it's over. One way or another, yes. Are you scared of Cross number of what comes after? Yes, why? Because for 3 months I've had a purpose. Save you, stop Cross, avenge the children. But when that's done, when there's no more fighting, what then? Then we find out if we're anything more than 2 people who needed each other to survive. Margaret rolled over, faced him. I think we're more. I hope you're right. They made love again, slower this time, less desperate, more tender. 2 people choosing each other not from need but from want. The 2 weeks passed in strange suspension. They stayed in the boarding house, read newspapers, watched as the story of St. Catherine Mission exploded across the frontier press. Oh, territorial marshal accused of massacre. 40 dead in mining land grab. The corruption of Warren Cross. Headlines that couldn't be ignored. Questions that demanded answers. And somewhere in Helena, Marshal Warren Cross read those same headlines and knew his world was ending. On the 14th day, Deputy Carson appeared at the boarding house. He looked older, haunted, but determined. Inspector Whitman sent me. Cross is making his move. He's trying to flee, heading for the Canadian border with 6 men, armed, dangerous. Carson met Margaret's eyes. Whitman has a posse assembled. He wants to know if you want to be there when Cross is brought in. Margaret looked at Caleb. Your choice, he said quietly. She turned back to Carson. Tell Whitman yes, we'll be there. Because some endings she knew you had to witness yourself. Some demons you had to face to truly be free. The posse rode out at dawn, 12 men, Whitman, Carson, Caleb, Margaret, 8 others, all armed, all ready. They caught Cross 20 miles north of Helena, trapped in a canyon, nowhere to run. The standoff lasted 3 hours. Cross demanded safe passage. Whitman demanded surrender. Finally, Cross made his choice. He drew his weapon, fired at Whitman. The posse returned fire. When the smoke cleared, Marshal Warren Cross lay dead in the snow, 6 bullets in his chest. Justice delivered not by a judge, but by the frontier law he tried to corrupt. Margaret stood over his body, felt nothing, no triumph, no satisfaction, just emptiness. "It's done," Caleb said quietly. "Yes. How do you feel, empty? Like I've been carrying a weight so long that I don't know who I am without it." "You're Margaret. That's enough." She turned to him. Is it really enough? For me, it is." Inspector Whitman approached, tipped his hat. "It's over, Sister Pierce. You're officially cleared of all charges. Self-defense ruling. You're free." Margaret looked at the word. Free. After months of running, months of fighting, months of surviving, she was free. But free to do what Caleb offered his hand. "Come home with me. Help me rebuild the cabin. We'll make a life. Quiet, simple. Just us. And the children. The 6 I saved, we'll check on them. Make sure they're behaved. Set up a fund with the mission gold. Give them a future." Margaret took his hand. "Yes, let's go home." The ride back to the Bitterroot Mountains took 6 days through early spring thaw. The world was waking from winter's grip, ice turning to running water, snow retreating to reveal brown earth beneath. Everything felt new, possible. They rode in comfortable silence most days, but on the third evening, camped beside a swollen creek, Margaret asked the question that had been building since they left Helena. What if we can't do this? What if we're only good at surviving together, not living together? Caleb was cleaning his rifle, methodical motions born of decades of habit. He didn't look up. "Then we figure that out when we get there. No sense borrowing trouble. I'm serious, Caleb. We've known each other 3 months. Most of that time we were running or fighting or hiding. We don't know each other. Not really, not in the ways that matter for building a life." Now he did look up, met her eyes across the fire. "I know you killed men to protect children you barely knew. I know you stood in a burning cabin and never flinched. I know you'd rather die than let evil men win. That's enough for me to know. But what about the small things? Do you snore? Do you like your coffee, strong or weak? Do you want children of your own someday? Do you believe in God anymore after what you've seen?" Margaret's voice had risen, not angry, frightened. The fear of a woman who'd lost everything once and was terrified to build something new only to watch it burn. Caleb set down the rifle, came around the fire, sat beside her. "Yes, I snore, like a hibernating bear, so I'm told. I like my coffee strong enough to strip paint. Children terrify me because I'm not sure I'd be a good father, but if you wanted them, I'd try. And God. I stopped believing in God after Antietam, but I started believing in something else. In people who choose to do right even when it's hard. People like you." He took her hand. "We'll figure out the rest as we go. That's all anyone does. The couples who think they have it all planned out, they're the ones who fail. Because life doesn't follow plans. It throws fire and blood and death at you, and you either survive it together or you don't." Margaret leaned against him. "I'm scared." "Good. So am I. Means we're paying attention." They reached the site of Caleb's destroyed cabin on the 7th day. The burned timbers stood like a burial mound, snow still covering the ruins in patches. Everything he'd built in 20 years of isolation reduced to charcoal and ash. Margaret dismounted, walked through the ruins, her boots crunched on frozen debris. "We'll rebuild," she said. "Make it bigger, strong enough for a family." Caleb joined her, studied the site with a builder's eye. "Foundation's still good. Stone fireplace survived. We can salvage some of the timber. Use the root cellar as a base. Build up from there." "How long?" "Through summer, maybe into fall. It'll be rough living while we work. I've lived through worse." They started that day, clearing debris, salvaging what could be saved. The work was hard, physical, exhausting, but it was also cleansing. Every burned beam they hauled away was a piece of the past being cleared for the future. On the 3rd day of clearing, they found something unexpected in the ruins of the loft. A metal box, scorched but intact. Inside were Caleb's personal effects. Letters from his dead mother, his discharge papers from the Union Army, a daguerreotype of his cavalry unit taken before Antietam. 12 young faces staring at the camera with the confidence of men who thought they were immortal. Margaret found him holding the photograph, silent tears streaming down his weathered face. She said nothing, just sat beside him, put her arm around his shoulders. Let him grieve. After a long while, Caleb spoke. I never cried for them, not once in 20 years. Thought if I didn't cry, didn't mourn, it meant I was strong, that I'd moved on. But you hadn't, no. I'd just frozen, like the land in winter, waiting for a thaw that never came. He looked at her. You're my thaw, Margaret. You're the thing that finally let me feel again. She kissed his forehead, tasted salt, then feel, grieve. Let it out. I'm not going anywhere. They buried the photograph that evening, a small ceremony, just the two of them. Caleb spoke the names of each man, told Margaret one thing he remembered about each. Anderson, who could spit tobacco 20 feet. Wilson, who sang Irish songs. McCarthy, who dreamed of opening a saloon. O'Brien, who wrote poetry when he thought no one was watching. Margaret added a prayer. Not the formal liturgy of her nun days. Something simpler, more honest. Lord, if you're listening, take care of these men. They died following orders, believing in a cause. If there's justice in the afterlife, let them have peace. They planted wildflower seeds over the grave. Come summer, this spot would bloom, a living memorial. As they walked back to their tent, Margaret asked quietly, do you feel lighter? Yes, I do. Good. Because tomorrow we start building. And I need you present, not haunted. I'm here, I promise. The rebuilding took 4 months. They worked dawn to dusk every day, felling trees, stripping bark, notching logs, raising walls. The cabin grew slowly, but it grew strong. Neighbors came to help. Word had spread about the nun and the mountain man who'd brought down Marshall Cross. Some came out of respect, others out of curiosity. A few came because Frontier Code demanded you help your neighbors, no questions asked. Among them was a young Blackfeet woman named Sarah. She arrived one morning in late June leading 3 children, a boy of 10, 2 girls 7 and 5. Margaret was mixing clay for chinking when she heard the horses, looked up, froze. The children stared back. Recognition dawned simultaneously on all 4 faces. Teacher Margaret. The boy's voice broke the spell. Margaret dropped her mixing stick and ran, scooped all 3 children into her arms, sank to her knees in the mud, sobbing. You're alive. Oh God, you're alive. Sarah approached slowly, spoke in careful English. I found them after the attack, hiding in the woods, took them to my family's camp. We've kept them safe. Margaret looked up, tears streaming. Thank you. Thank you. Sarah nodded. You saved my cousin's life once. At the mission, she had fever. You stayed with her 3 days, never left her side. This is my debt repaid. Caleb had stopped work, stood watching this reunion with something tight in his chest. These were 3 of the 6 children Margaret had saved, 3 survivors of the massacre. The boy whose name was Thomas noticed Caleb. Is that him? The man who helped you? Margaret wiped her eyes, stood. Yes, this is Caleb Stone. She paused, searching for the right word. He's my partner. Thomas walked over, extended his hand with solemn formality. Thank you for protecting Teacher Margaret. She's important. Caleb shook the small hand. I know she is. The other 2 children were Rebecca and Emma's sisters. They clung to Margaret like she might disappear if they let go. Sarah the elder spoke to Margaret. The children have been living with my family, but they need schooling. The mission is gone. There's nowhere for them to learn. Margaret's mind was already working. We'll build a school, here, small, just a room attached to the cabin. I'll teach them, and any other children who need it. Caleb caught her eye, raised an eyebrow. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't planned for children, for students, for the responsibility of shaping young minds. But looking at Margaret's face, seeing the purpose burning in her eyes for the first time since Cross died, he understood. She needed this, needed to turn the tragedy of St. Catherine into something productive, something that honored the dead by nurturing the living. We'll need more room, he said simply. I'll add a second building. Schoolhouse. Should be ready by fall. Margaret's smile could have lit the darkest winter night. The children stayed for 3 days, helped with the building, played in the woods, laughed. For the first time since the massacre, they were children again. Not survivors, not refugees, just children. On the third evening, Thomas approached Caleb while Margaret was cooking dinner. Mr. Stone, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you going to marry Teacher Margaret? Caleb blinked, hadn't expected that question. Why do you ask? Because she's happy when she looks at you. She wasn't happy before. After the mission, she was sad all the time. But now she's happy again. Out of the mouths of children, Caleb thought. Would that bother you if I married her? Thomas considered this seriously. Number one, I think it would be good. Teacher Margaret shouldn't be alone. And you make her not alone. That's very wise. My father told me that before he died. He said the worst thing in the world is being alone. That's why we need family. Even if family isn't blood. Caleb put his hand on the boy's shoulder. Your father was right. When Sarah came to collect the children, Margaret made her promise to bring them back in the fall when school started. Sarah agreed. But as she was leaving, she pulled Margaret aside. There are 3 more from the mission. We heard they're in Fort Benton, at the reservation school there. Margaret's breath caught. All 6 survived, yes. Do you want me to bring them too? For your school, yes. Please. All of them. After they left, Margaret and Caleb stood watching the dust settle from their departure. 6 children, Caleb said, plus however many others from the area. You're going to need help. I'll manage. You're also going to need to be respectable. Can't have an unmarried woman running a school. People talk. Margaret turned to him. Is this your awkward way of proposing? Probably. I'm not good at romantic gestures. No, you're really not. She took his hand. But I'll marry you anyway. On one condition. Name it. We do it right. Church, preacher, proper vows. I want to stand in front of God and everyone and claim you as mine. Caleb felt something warm spread through his chest. Redemption Creek has a church. Preacher Daniels. He's a good man, not judgmental. Then we'll go there next week. Before I lose my nerve. You've faced down armed men without flinching. But marriage scares you. Marriage is forever. Armed men are just temporary danger. Caleb laughed. Actually laughed, a sound he hadn't made in years. You're not wrong. They married on a Sunday in late June. The church in Redemption Creek was small wooden packed with people who'd heard the story and wanted to witness the unlikely union. Margaret wore a simple blue dress, homespun but clean. No veil, no elaborate decorations, just herself. Hair pulled back, hands calloused from building, scars visible on her arms. She didn't hide what she'd been through, wore her survival like armor. Caleb wore his only suit borrowed from the undertaker. It smelled faintly of camphor but fit well enough. He'd shaved, cut his hair, looked almost civilized. Preacher Daniels performed the ceremony. He was 70, white-haired with kind eyes that had seen too much frontier violence to judge anyone for surviving it. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. He paused, looked at Margaret. I knew Mother Superior at St. Catherine. Good woman, she would have been proud of you, proud of what you did, what you sacrificed to save those children. Margaret's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. The vows were traditional. Caleb spoke his clearly without hesitation. I, Caleb Stone, take you, Margaret Pierce, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Margaret's turn. Her voice was steady. I, Margaret Pierce, take you, Caleb Stone, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I vow to stand with you when the world says to run, to fight beside you, not behind you, to honor you, protect you, and never let you face the winter alone. She'd added her own words. Preacher Daniel smiled. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Caleb leaned down. Margaret reached up. They kissed to applause and scattered cheers from the congregation. As they walked down the aisle hand in hand, Margaret whispered, I'm terrified. Good, me too. They honeymooned in the half-built cabin. No fancy hotel, no trip to San Francisco. Just them and the mountains and the work that still needed doing. But it was perfect, that first night as husband and wife, lying in their bed under a roof Caleb had built with his own hands. Margaret spoke into the darkness. I never thought I'd have this. A home, a husband, a future that wasn't just survival. Neither did I. Thought I'd die alone in these mountains, buried in an unmarked grave, forgotten. We're not alone anymore. No, we're not. Summer passed in a blur of activity. The cabin was completed. The schoolhouse rose beside it, small but sturdy. Margaret prepared lessons while Caleb hunted traded-built furniture. They fell into a rhythm, domestic, peaceful, but peace they both knew was fragile. In early September, Margaret woke feeling different. Not ill, just different. She lay still, cataloging sensations. Tenderness in her breasts, a strange fullness in her abdomen, exhaustion that sleep didn't cure. Recognition dawned slowly. Then all at once, she was pregnant. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She sat on the edge of their bed, hand on her stomach, terror and wonder warring in her chest. Caleb found her there, read her face instantly. "You're sure?" "Yes. I'm a nurse. I know the signs. How do you feel about it?" "Terrified. I'm 31 years old, nearly 32. I've never had a child. The mission never prepared me for this. And what kind of mother would I be? I've killed people, Caleb. 7 men. How do you raise a child with hands like mine?" Caleb knelt in front of her. "Took those hands in his. You raised them to be strong, to protect the weak, to stand up to evil. You raised them the way you were raised, with love and discipline and the knowledge that survival isn't selfish. But what if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? Then you'll fail the same way every parent fails, by trying your best and falling short. But you'll try, that's what matters." Margaret searched his face. "And how do you feel about becoming a father scared to death? But also," he paused, "also hopeful. Maybe this is how we heal, by creating something new, something innocent, something that never knew war or death or any of the darkness we've carried." Margaret pulled him close. "If it's a boy, we'll name him Samuel, after your mother's father. And if it's a girl, Catherine, for the mission, for Mother Superior, for the children who didn't survive." Caleb nodded. His throat was too tight for words. Fall came. The school opened. 6 children from the mission reunited. 4 local farm children. 10 students total. Margaret taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history. She was fierce but fair. The children loved her. Caleb watched her teach one afternoon, saw her patience as she worked with a struggling reader. Her pride when a student mastered a difficult concept. The way she unconsciously rested her hand on her growing belly between lessons. She was made for this, he realized. Not the convent, not the battlefield. This, teaching, nurturing, building the future one child at a time. Winter arrived with brutal suddenness. By November, the mountains were locked in snow and ice. The school closed until spring. The children returned to their families. And Caleb and Margaret were alone again. Margaret was 6 months pregnant, moving carefully, tiring easily, but still insisting on doing her share of the work. One evening in early December, she stood at the window watching snow fall. "My baby's going to be born in winter, just like how I was reborn in winter. When you found me in that snow cave." Caleb joined her, put his arm around her expanding waist. "Seems fitting. Winter strips away everything false, leaves only what's essential. Our child will be born essential, pure." Margaret leaned against him. "I'm scared of the birth. I've delivered dozens of babies. I know all the things that can go wrong. Hemorrhage, breach, cord compression. I know too much. Knowledge isn't the enemy. Fear is, and you're the bravest person I know. What if I die? What if the baby dies? What if you're left alone again?" Caleb turned her to face him. "Then I'll grieve. I'll be destroyed. But I'll survive, because that's what you taught me. That survival isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's how we honor the people we've lost. Promise me something, anything, if it comes down to choosing. Between me and the baby. Save the baby." Caleb's jaw tightened. "No, Caleb, no. I won't lose you. Not now, not after everything. The baby needs a chance at life. I've had 31 years. That's more than most people get. Stop talking like you're already dead. I'm talking like a woman who knows the risks. Promise me, Caleb, please." He couldn't, wouldn't, just held her while she cried against his chest. The contractions started 3 weeks later on a bitter December night. Wind howling, snow falling so thick you couldn't see 10 feet. Caleb had prepared as best he could. Boiled water, gathered clean cloths, built up the fire to blazing. But he'd never delivered a baby, never even seen one born. Margaret tried to guide him. Between contractions, she gave instructions. Clinical, precise. But as the labor intensified, as the pain grew beyond bearing, she lost the ability to direct. 6 hours, 8, 10. The baby was breech, feet first. Margaret had felt it turn weeks ago, had tried exercises to shift it, but the child was stubborn. Like its mother, Caleb thought grimly. At hour 12, Margaret started hemorrhaging. Blood soaked the sheets. Her face went pale. Caleb felt panic clawed his throat. Margaret, stay with me. Stay awake. Her eyes fluttered. Can't. Too tired. You don't get to quit. Not now. Not after surviving everything else. You hear me? You fight. But the blood kept coming. Caleb made a decision, prayed for the first time in 20 years, not the formal prayers of his childhood. Something rawer, more desperate. God, if you're real, if you've ever listened to a prayer in your life, listen now. Don't take her. Please, I'll do anything. I'll be anything. Just don't take her from me. His hands moved on instinct, memory of battlefield medicine, of desperate surgeries in field hospitals. He reached inside, found the baby's feet, pulled, gentle but firm, guided the child out inch by terrifying inch. The baby emerged silent, blue, not breathing, no. Caleb cleared the infant's mouth, rubbed its back, nothing. He breathed into the tiny mouth, once, twice. The baby gasped, cried. Pink flooded into blue skin. A boy, Samuel. But Margaret was still bleeding. Caleb packed the wound with cloth. Pressure, direct pressure, the way he'd been taught. The bleeding slowed, stopped. Margaret's eyes opened, focused on him. The baby alive, breathing, perfect. Tears streamed down her face. Let me see him. Caleb wrapped the infant, placed him in Margaret's arms. The baby rooted found her breast, began to nurse. Margaret looked down at her son, at this tiny life they'd created, this impossible miracle. We did it. You did it. I just kept you from bleeding out. She smiled, exhausted, triumphant. Same thing. Caleb collapsed into the chair beside the bed. His hands were shaking. His entire body was shaking. He'd been so close to losing her, inches from becoming the thing he feared most. Alone, but she'd survived. They'd both survived. Again. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Thank you for not giving up on me. Never, not ever. She fell asleep, still holding Samuel. Caleb kept watch, made sure she was breathing, made sure the bleeding didn't restart, made sure his family was safe. His family. The words felt strange, foreign, but also right. He had a family now, a wife, a son, people who depended on him, people he'd die to protect. The isolation of the past 20 years felt like someone else's life, a story he'd heard but hadn't lived. This was his life now, this cabin, this woman, this child. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Samuel grew strong and loud and stubborn. By his first birthday, he was walking. By 2, talking in complete sentences. By 3, following Caleb on short hunting trips, learning to track, to move quietly, to respect the wilderness. Margaret returned to teaching when Samuel was 6 months old, bringing him to school. The children took turns holding him, teaching him his letters. The school grew to 20 students by 1880. Margaret taught academics, Caleb taught survival skills. They became pillars of the community, the unlikely couple who'd survived everything and built something good from ashes. But they never forgot. Every year on the anniversary of the St. Catherine Massacre, they rode to the mission ruins, placed flowers on the mass grave, spoke the names of the dead. Thomas, Rebecca, and Emma came too, once they were old enough, standing beside their teacher, honoring friends who hadn't survived. The years passed in rhythms of seasons, teaching in warm months, quiet winters. Samuel growing into a serious young man, tall and strong and kind. He helped run the school, hunted with his father, read voraciously. In 1898, when Samuel was 21, war came. Spain and America. The call went out for volunteers. Samuel announced his intention to enlist over dinner one night. Margaret's fork clattered to her plate. No, absolutely not. Mother, you don't know what war is, what it does to people. That's why I need to go, to learn, to serve. Caleb had been silent. Now he spoke. Why? Why this fight? Because men who don't stand up to tyranny enable it. You taught me that. Both of you. You stood up to Marshall Cross. You fought when it would have been easier to run. I'm doing the same thing. Margaret stood, walked to the window, her shoulders rigid. I watched 28 children die, Samuel. I held them while they bled out. I won't watch my son die, too. You won't. I'll come back. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll fight. I'll survive. Because you taught me how. Caleb met his son's eyes, saw the determination there, the same look Margaret had worn in that burning cabin. He sighed. When do you leave? 2 weeks. Training camp in San Francisco. Then Cuba. Margaret turned, tears streaming. I can't lose you. You're everything. Samuel embraced her. I'm not Father's cavalry unit. I'm not the mission children. I'm your son, and I'm stubborn as hell. I'll survive. You can't know that. No, but I learned from the best. Samuel shipped out in March, fought in Cuba, saw combat, was wounded twice, minor injuries, survived. He returned in December, thinner, harder haunted. That night around the fire he spoke of war, of heat and disease and terror, of friends who died screaming. I understand now, he said quietly, what you went through, how it changes you, how you carry it forever. Caleb nodded. The question is what you do with it. Let it destroy you or use it to become something better. What did you do with it? Found your mother, built a life, tried to create more good than harm. Samuel stared into the fire. I want to do that, use what I've learned, help people. Then do it. We'll help however we can. In 1914, Samuel married Elizabeth, a teacher from Butte. Smart, strong. They had a daughter in 1915 named Catherine Margaret, a son in 1916 named Thomas. But in 1916, Margaret died, peaceful, in her sleep, 80 years old. Caleb held her hand as she slipped away, whispered in her ear, thank you for choosing me, for choosing life, for 40 years of everything. She smiled, squeezed his hand weakly. See you soon, old man. Then she was gone. Caleb lived 2 more years, quiet, waiting. Samuel visited often with the grandchildren. The cabin became a place of stories, of legacy, of remembering. In November 1918, the Great War ended, but the casualties kept coming home. Broken men, shattered boys. Samuel coordinated aid, saw too much grief, began drinking. One December night, he came to the cabin, drunk, desperate, holding a knife. Caleb, 91 and dying of pneumonia, saw his son's intention and began to speak, told the whole story. From the snow cave to Helena, from fear to love, from death to life, spoke for hours, his voice growing weaker, but never stopping. When dawn came, Samuel sat with tears streaming. She wanted to die too, didn't she? Yes, but she chose to live, to fight, to protect the children, to build something good from ashes. Caleb gripped Samuel's hand. You think you're the only man who ever wanted to die? You're not. Your mother wanted death. I wanted death. We chose life instead, not because it was easy, because it was necessary, because people depended on us. His grip tightened. Your children need you. Elizabeth needs you. You don't get to quit. You survive. You endure. You find a way through. That's what it means to be a stone. Samuel's hand slowly opened. The knife clattered to the floor. Caleb lay back, his breathing labored, but his eyes clear. Promise me. Promise you will fight to live. Not for me, for Catherine, for Thomas, for all the grandchildren I'll never meet. Promise me. The story continues. I promise, Father. Caleb smiled, closed his eyes. Good. That's all I needed to hear. He died 3 days later. Peaceful. With Samuel holding his hand. They buried him beside Margaret on the hill overlooking the cabin, the schoolhouse, the land they'd tamed together. Samuel kept his promise, stopped drinking, reconciled with Elizabeth, raised his children to be strong, kind, resilient, told them the story of their grandparents, made sure they understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to stand when every part of you wanted to run. Samuel lived to 84, died in 1960 surrounded by children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. The Stone family had grown, prospered, thrived, and all because two broken people chose each other, chose life, chose to build something good from ashes. The cabin still stands today, preserved as a historical site. The Montana Historical Society maintains it, tours given in summer. The story of Sister Margaret Pierce and Caleb Stone taught in schools across the state. The children know, they know that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is survive. That love isn't always pretty or easy or romantic. Sometimes it's two scarred souls finding refuge in each other, finding the strength to keep going when the world wants you to quit. They know that legacy isn't just about blood, it's about the lives you touch, the children you save, the example you set. And they know that winter always ends, that spring always comes, that even in the darkest moments, there's the possibility of rebirth. Sister Margaret Pierce, the killer nun who chose life, who turned grief into purpose, who built a school from mission ashes. Caleb Stone, the haunted veteran who found redemption in protecting a stranger, who learned that survival wasn't selfish, who discovered that the only way to heal old wounds was to create new love. Two broken people, one impossible love. A legacy that endures. Love isn't always a fairy tale. Sometimes it's two people in hell reaching for each other's hands, and that's enough. That's everything. That's the story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations. The story of how we survive together.